Hello everyone, my name is Havian and today I'll be breaking down the combat system and showing you how I built some of my first few teams in Neverness to Everness. In my previous videos for the game, I focused on some of the recreational and anomaly focused activities within the world, but this time I want to focus on the combat since it's still a core aspect of the game. The launch livestream for Neverness to Everness went through various combat system related features, like the Esper cycle reactions that can happen between party members, but I wanted to share the experience I had while trying to put together teams using all of the characters that were available during the beta. There may be a few balance adjustments and updated animations for the characters in the launch version of the game, but I'm not expecting their core gameplay mechanics to change much, so I should be able to replicate a few of the teams I'll be showing once the game launches, depending on the characters I get. But before I get into showing you the teams, I'll give you a quick rundown of the combat and Esper cycle systems, so you'll have a bit of extra context for the teams I was trying out. The combat system revolves around each party member's core abilities and how they interact with the break system, and an elemental combo system called Esper cycles. Characters can use basic attacks, skills, and an ultimate, which can be modified depending on a character's unique traits, like being able to generate or consume a unique resource, or use contextual inputs to activate new attacks. A character's basic attacks can be used freely, but their skills will go into a cooldown after use. And as your party continues to deal damage to enemies, their ultimate energy will gradually charge, and once it's fully charged and the icon begins to glow, they can perform their ultimate attack. To defend against enemy attacks, you can use a critical dodge by evading just before an enemy's attack connects. This lets you follow up with a counter attack that deals extra break damage. Every enemy has a white break gauge that gradually depletes as they take damage. Once the gauge is empty, the enemy will take a burst of break damage and will be stunned, leaving them vulnerable to your attacks until the bar recharges. You can take advantage of an enemy's elemental weakness to break them even faster. This is where the Esper cycle system comes in. As you attack enemies in combat, the character currently in use will generate a resource that powers their Esper cycles. This is displayed as a circular elemental gauge next to the character's health or on the character portrait. When a character's Esper cycle gauge is full, switching to another character that has a compatible element while their portrait is flashing will consume the gauge of the previous character, and the incoming character will perform an entry attack. The entry attack applies the effects of an Esper cycle onto the enemy's hit, and the type of effect that is activated is based on the elements of the two characters you're rotating between. If the incoming character's element matches the enemy's weakness, the entry attack deals a significant amount of additional break damage. This makes elemental team building a key strategy for quickly stunning tougher enemies and taking advantage of their vulnerability. One of the most effective ways to generate a character's Esper cycle energy is when parrying an enemy's attack. When enemies are charging a special move, a warning indicator will appear. If you time an attack to hit the enemy when their warning lines overlap, you'll perform a parry. This can be done with basic attacks, a character's skills, or when performing an Esper cycle. Each element has two other elements that it can form an Esper cycle with, so this needs to be taken into consideration when setting up a team. For example, combining the Cosmos element with the Anime element will create the Blossom Esper cycle. This Esper cycle creates a spot on the ground near the enemy that will spawn 5 projectiles that track their target and explode after reaching nearby enemies. There are also specific Esper cycles that can be layered on top of a previous effect that's active, which triggers an additional combo effect, like the Discord Esper cycle that reduces a percentage of an enemy's break bar when the enemy is under the effects of both the Nova and Scorch Esper cycles. So depending on the combination of elements in a party, you can create a chain of Esper cycles that characters can take advantage of. As you continue to upgrade your characters, each of them has an additional modifier that activates when triggering a specific Esper cycle. These modifiers can change the way an Esper cycle functions, which can lead to some powerful interactions between the various effects. From what I could tell, there were a few things to consider when team building. One was to find out if there was any synergy between the skills of the characters that have compatible Esper cycle elements. And if there was, I had to then figure out a good way to combine the Esper cycle effects with the character's skills. The characters in my teams were roughly between level 40 and 50, and for the most part they were equipped with blue and purple equipment. So keep in mind that they could all be much stronger if I were using higher tier cartridges and modules with better stats. But despite my lower level and weaker equipment, it was still possible to defeat bosses and enemies that were at a much higher level than me by making use of the various character and combat mechanics. I doubt the teams I tested are the best ones for every character, but I wanted to experiment with a variety of teams that could be used on a wide range of accounts depending on the characters that people had available. So I put together teams that were suitable for both free-to-play players and players that wanted to make use of more of the standard and limited characters available at launch. I only spent roughly a day trying most of these teams, so I'm sure there's a ton of room for improvement, but it was fun trying to figure out what they could do. I won't be outlining every ability for each character within a team, but I will be mentioning how certain parts of a character's kit works if they're necessary to understand how that team operates. The first team I want to show contains Hathor, Skia, Zero, and Edgar. All of these characters can be obtained in the standard character board, so it will be a fairly easy team for anyone to put together early into the game. In addition to Hathor and Zero being able to deal quick burst damage, this team takes advantage of the Remora Esper cycle. Remora excels at slowing down fast-moving enemies, so if you're fighting against bosses that move very quickly, using a team that can take advantage of Remora can help make enemies a lot easier to hit. The effect lasts for 5 seconds by default, but it seems to stack 5 times if you're able to reapply it quickly. The catch is that the higher that you stack the debuff, the faster the effect wears off. So you'll need to either find a way to reapply it quickly or take advantage of specific character traits if you want to make the most of this debuff. Zero is the default name for the main character, and they're the main Esper cycle enabler for this team. They are currently the only character in the game that has the instant cycle combat role, which is a role given to characters that can instantly trigger an Esper cycle without waiting for it to charge naturally. Zero is able to do this with their skill that has a 16-second cooldown at default. This allows them to rotate between Hathor and Skia to frequently trigger the Remora Esper cycle. Edgar is also on the team to sustain them when needed and to provide them with additional Remora Esper cycles since he also has the Cosmos element. But he wasn't essential to this team and is most likely a character that I'll swap out for a buffer at release. Hathor was my main damage dealer in this team. She focuses on burst damage after building up stacks of her express delivery power resource during combat. After using her ultimate, she can consume this resource to perform a skill combo, with each press of the skill button doing a follow-up part of the combo as long as she has enough express delivery power. She's strong and works well against smaller enemies, but since some of her attack animations lock her in place and need to be performed in succession, like her ultimate combo, she can be susceptible to interruption. And there's always the risk of faster moving enemies like some bosses moving out of the way before the full combo connects, which can waste her built up resources. So getting her burst damage in while an enemy is broken or while they're under the effect of Remora does help a lot when using her. Skia does a good job of constantly refreshing and increasing the Remora stacks on an enemy that currently has the Remora effect. This is due to its passive skill called Suppression, which inflicts an additional Remora stack on a target when his Fang thrust effect from his attacks locks onto them, which is indicated by the black and yellow rings under the target. So in this team, Skia's job is to stay on the field and maintain the Remora debuff on enemies to keep them slowed down, while Zero and Hathor deal the bulk of the damage with their ultimate bursts. The next team was my break-focused team, which included Daffodill, Baicang, Haniel, and Fadia, and it was actually my favorite team to play gameplay-wise. This is another team that can be put together just using characters in the standard board, but since it contains 3 standard S-class characters, it could be a little harder to put together if you have limited resources. This team focuses on damage over time and break damage, but due to the gameplay mechanics of the characters in the team and the layered Esper cycles, it can be a bit harder to keep track of everything smoothly. This team makes use of 3 Esper cycle effects. The first is Scorch, which inflicts a damage over time effect on enemies. The second is Nova, which deals a burst of damage after 5 seconds. And the third is Discord, which deducts a percentage of the target's break gauge when they're inflicted with both the Nova and Scorch effects at the same time. The first character in this team is the burst DPS, Daffodill. She has a focus on break damage and her skills encourage a swap focused playstyle, since one of her abilities will only activate when swapping back to her from another character. When using Daffodill's ultimate, she gains 2 charges of Phantom Step. This skill activates automatically when Daffodill switches from another character, but if it's used to parry an enemy, it deals higher damage and break and instantly refills her ultimate again. This turns her into a bit of a parry tank that can consistently chain her ultimate and Phantom Step attacks as long as she can consistently parry enemies. Daffodill's Phantom Step allows the second DPS, Baicang, to get more fill time as he inflicts the enemies with his damage over time effects, while also triggering the Scorch Esper cycle on enemies with Daffodill. But since his animations can be pretty lengthy, this gave me enough time to swap back to Daffodill to trigger her Phantom Step and do some additional attacks before swapping back to Baicang. When I first started using this team, I spent a lot of time clumsily swapping between these characters, but the more I used them, the more I started to grasp which attacks were safe to swap between. The next character in the team is Haniel, a buffer that is able to enhance the party and the active character's attack in various ways. She can also give the active character a buff that causes them to deal additional damage for a specific period of time. And Fadia is the sustain for the team. She can automatically redirect a portion of the damage dealt to party members onto herself and can recover a portion of her health after casting her ultimate. Since both Haniel and Fadia were switched to less frequently than both the DPS, it helped to have them both on the team since they shared the same element, which let me alternate between them and Daffodill in order to inflict the Nova Esper cycle on enemies more frequently. This was one of the last teams I was able to put together in the beta, since I obtained Daffodill fairly late, but even with the limited time I had to play with them, they still ended up being my favorite team. The next team was more of a premium anima elemental team, since it revolved around the limited character Nanally. This team also included Zero, Sakiri, and Jiuyuan, who also doubled as this team's sustain, since I managed to unlock her Intel Turns into Blades awakening effect, which allowed her to provide the team with basic healing after using specific attacks. The main damage dealer for this team is Nanally, and due to the way her abilities work, she tends to want a lot of field time. So I used her in a team that also has quick burst damage characters and a buffer that enhances other characters' attack. This team makes use of the Hexed Esper cycle, which deals an additional instance of 20% follow-up attack damage based on the damage dealt to the target by anima and incantation damage dealers for 12 seconds, which is an Esper cycle that pairs nicely with Nanaly's constant flow of multi-hit attacks. The other Esper cycle that this team can take advantage of is Blossom, which creates an area on the ground that fires anima projectiles at nearby enemies for a certain amount of time. Depending on how frequently Blossom can be activated, it can deal a barrage of extra damage to enemies independent of your character's actions. Nanaly's continuous attacks can be enhanced after using her ultimate, which summons her underboss familiar to fight alongside her, dealing additional instances of follow-up damage when she attacks, which does pair nicely with the additional damage that can be dealt after using the Hexed Esper cycle. Just like in most teams, Zero functions as an Esper cycle enabler, but in this team, I'm using them to activate the Blossom effect between Nanally and Jiuyuan as much as possible. Jiuyuan is a burst DPS character, so she deals high damage within a short amount of time before switching out to another character. Since I enabled an awakening node that provided a small amount of healing to the group, it let me focus on a team that could make use of 3 DPS characters and 1 dedicated buffer. When attacking enemies, Jiuyuan generates Rose Pack bullets that can be used to fire a barrage of shots into the enemy depending on how many bullets she has loaded. But an interesting thing that I noticed was that she continues to fire these bullets after she's been switched, which helped to smooth things out since I didn't need to wait for the animation to end before changing characters. She is also able to place a damage over time effect onto the enemy, which can then be detonated after using specific attacks. And Sakiri was the buffer for this team. She's able to increase the attack of the party and can also assist the team by grouping smaller enemies or by suspending them in midair for a short period of time. I mainly use her for the attack buffs and to activate the Hex Esper cycle in this team, but her crowd control abilities are still useful in various situations. For the next team, I wanted to focus on characters that can be unlocked directly through gameplay. Chiz and Mint are the DPS characters in this team, Adler is the sustain and Haniel is the buffer, and they can all be unlocked through the various gameplay modes or by playing through the story without needing to roll on any of the gachas. So it's a team that everyone will be able to use. Since this team uses Cosmos, Anima, and Incantation characters, it makes use of the same Blossom and Hex Esper cycles as the previous team. The difference this time is that the Cosmos and Anima elemental characters will be sharing the main DPS role. In this team, Mint and Chiz are fighting for field time, but I think they're a team that could end up working pretty well if I put more time into practicing with them. Even though they both want a decent amount of field time, Chiz is able to continue dealing damage for a short while after switching when using the hold version of her skill, which is something I don't think I've taken full advantage of yet. Chiz is a character that can only be unlocked and upgraded by increasing your City Tycoon level, and not through any of the gacha systems. So it is pretty surprising that as a free character, she has some fun gameplay mechanics and is pretty strong, which made this team entertaining to use. Mint is the second damage dealer in this team, and she's the character that can perform Esper cycles with both Adler and Chiz. I'd usually aim to trigger the Hexed Esper cycle before unloading all of my damage with Mint for the extra 20% bonus follow-up damage, but it's not something I could do each time since the Esper cycle wasn't always charged. Adler is the sustain for this team that can also deal damage over time. He might not deal as much damage as the dedicated damage dealers, but the extra damage does add up over time. His main purpose is to provide the team with shields and the Hexed Esper cycle, so he does help a lot in his own way. And Haniel is the final character I use for this team. Just like in the previous team, she is used for buffing the party, but this time she isn't been used for any of the Esper cycles. She's just there for me to throw out some extra buffs whenever I have the chance. And since she's using a specialized arc that's dropped by the Baicang boss, she can provide the active character with an attack buff for just existing on the team. The next team was a bit experimental, just to see how well having 3 burst characters could work together. This team has Hathor, Zero, Jiuyuan, and Sakiri, with Jiuyuan acting as the team sustain again, and with Sakiri being the team buffer. This was a triple burst DPS team that surprisingly can make use of 4 different Esper cycles. Hathor and Zero can activate the speed slowing Remora effect, Zero and Jiuyuan can activate the Blossom effect, Jiuyuan and Sakiri can activate the Hexed effect for bonus follow-up damage, and the Charge effect is activated when the Blossom projectiles hits a target that's already affected by Remora, giving the active character an additional 10 ultimate energy each time a Blossom projectile hits the target while Charge is in effect. It's a team that surprisingly can work, but I'm pretty messy with it at the moment. Things start off pretty smooth with the rotations between characters and their Esper cycles, but if a fight starts to drag on, it did feel like my timing started to get out of sync. When testing this team out, I was fighting against a level 65 boss using level 40 and 50 characters in blue and purple gear. So towards the end of the fight, it was a bit harder to rebuild my resources to get the timing back on track. The team did get pretty messy to use when this happened, but I feel like it can be improved with a bit more experimentation and some better equipment. The next team was one that I used out of curiosity. I wanted to see how well a team that only consisted of A-class characters could perform. The characters that I decided to use were Skia, Mint, Haniel, and Adler. And these characters can all be obtained through gameplay or the standard banner, which makes them easily accessible to everyone. This team makes use of 2 different Esper cycles, but the difference is that it's done between 2 pairs of characters. Skia and Haniel can trigger the Stain Esper cycle to take advantage of the 20% damage boost to their elements, and Mint and Adler can activate Hexed to take advantage of the 20% bonus follow-up damage to their attacks. So the focus of this team is swapping between all of the members when necessary to deal damage and to build up their Esper cycles, so that the buffs from the Esper cycles can be funneled into Skia and Mint when they're available. Despite the fact that these characters are A-class, they were still surprisingly strong, but they just don't offer the same level of flexibility or mechanical depth that can come from some of the S-class characters. I was severely underleveled and undergeared while testing this team out, but they still performed better than expected against single target enemies. Once the game launches, I still think I'll give this team another try as a bit of a side project, since I'm sure I will be leveling all of these characters anyway to use on other teams. With a lot of my future Neverness to Everness videos, I'll be updating you all on my progress through the game to show you all the things I've done or discovered. Some of them will be for fun, where I'm just hanging out in the city with my characters, and others will be more informative like this video. I'm hoping that the things I've found may spark ideas for your own account or journey, and hopefully if you discover things that I've overlooked or you think I should try out, I'm hoping you'll let me know. I think this game gives players a lot of room for experimentation, so if we share what we know, we may be able to discover some interesting things over time. If you want to see some of the team gameplay that I use in this video more closely, I'll be uploading a few onto my gameplay channel. It's where I occasionally upload my gameplay focused videos with minimal editing, since it can also be helpful to see what a game is like by watching extended gameplay of it being played normally. But if you want to be the first to know when a new video for Neverness to Everness or other action games and RPGs are available on this channel, then don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications. I'll be making some new videos very soon, but for now, here's another video that you might find interesting.